Hey guys, it's Jason from Numark. Today we're talking about the NS7II, and in this specific video we're going to cover some of the pad modes. Today we're going to talk about cues, auto rolls, looping, and how to set and save your manual loops inside of Serato DJ. Let's start with hot cue mode. Launching hot cues from a pad is a more musical way to launch hot cues, especially if you're familiar with the MPC style pads or finger drumming. In cue mode 1, when you engage the first cue mode, the cue button on any pad with a stored hot cue will be red. This is the first cue mode and the standard mode for storing and launching hot cues. Here you can store up to 8 hot cues. We also have 5 dedicated cue buttons along the side of the mixer. This will ensure that your first 5 hot cues are always available, even when another pad mode is engaged. The dedicated cue buttons are functionally the same as the first cue mode on the pads and work as such even if a different pad mode is active. To store a hot cue, simply hit an empty pad at any point in the song where you'd like to recall later. A pad that is red indicates that a hot cue has been stored in that location. You'll notice that if you stored a hot cue in one of the first 5 locations, the reciprocal dedicated cue button will light up as well. To remove a hot cue, hold down the shift button and hit a red pad. The hot cue is then removed. If slip mode is engaged, the hot cues will behave slightly differently. Slip mode is a function that will always return you to the point in the track where the playhead would have been had you not changed or interrupted the position of the track. In the case of hot cues, launching a hot cue will play the track from the cue point until you release the pad. It will then return you to the point in the track where it otherwise would have been. The second cue mode will activate an auto loop, beginning at the cue point. When cue mode 2 is engaged, the cue button on any pad with a stored hot cue will turn orange. You can then strike the pad to engage an auto loop beginning at the cue point. The pad will turn blue and continue to loop until you strike the pad again. The cue roll function will use auto loop length selected in Serato. You can set it initially, but bear in mind that if you use auto loop or auto roll, the cue loop length will change. With slip mode engaged, the cue roll becomes a momentary button, meaning that the auto loop will disengage when you release the pad and the track will resume playback at the point where it otherwise would have been. The second pad functions are the auto loop and loop roll modes. These work only with analyzed tracks. If the track is analyzed, you'll see a grid marker along with the bar numbers on the waveform within Serato. If your track isn't analyzed, you can use the tap button to analyze the track. Pressing the button once will engage auto loop mode. Once engaged, the function button and the pads will turn dark blue. Each pad will activate a loop of a different length, and the loop will stay lit until you hit the pad again. Once you strike a pad, it will change color to indicate the current loop length. The loop lengths are as follows. On pad 6 will activate a 4-beat loop, pad 7 will activate an 8-beat loop, pad 8 will activate a 16-beat loop, and for loops less than 1 bar, pad 5 is a 2-beat loop, pad 4 is a 1-beat loop, pad 3 is half a beat, pad 2 is a quarter of a beat, and pad 1 is an eighth of a beat. If slip mode is on before activating a loop, when you release the loop, the song will jump to the point in the song where you would have otherwise been. Else the song will continue playing from its current position. When any loop is active, whether an auto loop, manual loop, loop roll, or cue loop, the parameter arrow buttons will light up, indicating that there is a function assigned to them and is available for use. The forward arrow will double the active loop length, and the back arrow will cut it in half. You'll notice that the highlighted pad will update to indicate the loop length. It's possible to shorten or lengthen the loop outside of the range that the pads can indicate. For example, if you half the loop to just a tiny sliver, no pad can be highlighted. In these cases, you can jump over to loop mode and release the loop with pad 7. You can also use shift with the parameter arrow buttons to skip forward or backward in the track by 1 loop length. This is true in both auto loop and manual loops. The second mode of the auto and roll button is loop roll. Loop rolls are similar to auto loops, except the pads become momentary switches, meaning that the loop is only active when you're pressing the pad. To activate loop roll mode, press the auto roll button until it and the pads turn light blue. You can now press and hold any pad to create an auto loop. While it's most common to use shorter loop lengths for loop rolls, the loop lengths are the same as in auto loop mode. When using loop rolls, releasing the loop always returns you to the point in the track where you otherwise would have been. Therefore, slip mode has no effect on loop rolls. You can create loops by setting and adjusting your in and out points manually. Here you can also store and recall up to 8 loops. This function has only one mode. Pressing the loop button once gives you access to the first 4 loop locations. Pressing it again gives you access to the second 4. To create a loop manually, hit the loop button. Hit pad 5 to place the in point and pad 6 to place the out point. The track is now looping. If you'd like to adjust the in point, strike pad 5 and use the platter to move the in point to the desired location. Strike pad 5 again before releasing the platter. Similarly, you can adjust the out point by striking pad 6 and moving the platter. Strike pad 6 again when the out point is in the desired location and then release the platter. To release a manual loop or any loop, hit pad 7. Pad 8 is your reloop button. It will also reactivate the most recent loop or the save loop that's selected to be recalled. The standard parameter arrow functions for loop are also available here. You can half or double the loop length, or use shift plus the arrow buttons to skip around the track by 1 loop length. To store the currently playing loop, simply strike any of the first 4 pads. You can store a manual loop, an auto loop, or a cue loop. To recall a loop, strike the pad that contains the loop you'd like to recall and strike the reloop pad. You can delete a saved loop by holding down the shift button and striking the pad that contains the loop you'd like to delete. To access the next 4 save locations, hit loop button a second time. The manual loop functions are still the same, but loop locations 5 through 8 are now available. That wraps up today's video of the first 3 pad modes on the NS7II. Stay tuned for more videos as we talk about the rest of the pad modes, the platters, and some of the touch capacitive modes on the NS7II.